The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. America is built on the promise of equality under the law, and yet increasingly our political blunders prevent us from achieving the promise of a fair and blind justice system or accepting the uncomfortable realities required to model such a standard. Everyone had an opinion about Kyle Rittenhouse. He was a victim or he was a demon. It was an act of self-defense, or it was white supremacy and white privilege personified. And the honest-to-God truth is that the overwhelming majority of these unflinching, unnuanced opinions were more strongly rooted in social posturing than they were in any meaningful legal scholarship. Now, as is the case with most famous trials, Americans filled the information void of the Kyle Rittenhouse case with their own truth, their own pain, their own aspirations. And while that is the perfect recipe for great ratings on your cable television dial, it makes the search for justice in a court of law a much more challenging affair. And so while the publics have exchanged in its never-ending war of pre-existing biases, the central figure responsible for preventing that collective bias from tainting the business of preserving equality under the law was the man at the center of the courtroom frenzy, Judge Bruce Schroeder himself. And just as the information gap with Kyle Rittenhouse was filled not with truth, but with cultural grandstanding, the knowledge deficit over the true role of a judge was not filled with facts, but rather the historic grievances of our nation's shortcomings under the law on our path to liberty and justice for all. Now, you see, a judge should excoriate a sworn officer of the court for willfully attempting to mislead the jury on a matter of law so basic to our legal system, it is featured practically on every single legal television show known to man: the right to remain silent. And yet, because many people's dislike for Kyle Rittenhouse outpaced their concern for a fair and accurate trial, well, Judge Schroeder became the focus of their ire. A judge should throw out a gun charge, or any charge for that matter, if the letter of the law dictates that the charge never should have been brought in the first place because the offense does not fit the legal requirement to prosecute. That's not judicial bias. That's actual judicial best practices. The American Bar Association in Standard 6-1.1 sets forth the general responsibilities for a trial judge. The very first obligation listed thereunder states, the trial judge has the responsibility for safeguarding both the rights of the accused and the interest of the public in the administration of criminal justice. The adversary nature of the proceedings does not relieve the trial judge of the obligation of raising on his or her initiative at all appropriate times and in appropriate manner matters which may significantly promote a just determination of the trial. It goes on to say that the purpose of a criminal trial is to determine whether the prosecution has established the guilt of the accused as required by law. And the trial judge should not allow the proceedings to be used for any other purpose. See, that's the gig, folks. That is what the person hired for the job is supposed to do. Idly sitting back and allowing a person to be convicted of violating gun laws that do not exist because you happen to dislike guns is not justice. That is judicial malpractice. Letting a prosecutor attempt to sway a jury to convict someone for making poor decisions if the poor decisions in question do not violate the letter of the law is not justice. It is an abdication of our shared responsibility to our system of justice. And so let's be clear here. None of this makes Kyle Rittenhouse innocent. But in America, in this particular case, with this particular fact pattern, it does likely make him not guilty. Because criminal justice in America is predicated on a guilt threshold, not an innocence one. You are found guilty or not guilty. Innocence and culpability are a completely separate matter. And if that infuriates you, I get it. Freedom isn't free. In fact, it's actually often quite unpleasant. Because politics aside, watching anyone you believe is undeserving of the benefit of the doubt receive the full benefit of equal protection can be a bitter pill to swallow. But that's also not Kyle Rittenhouse's burden to bear. And so, no, the problem wasn't that the trial was rigged to protect white conservatives who kill, as Joy Reid of MSNBC irresponsibly suggested. The problem is that the system is rigged against people without means, without access, without an internet movement behind them to champion their cause. See, Kyle Rittenhouse did not receive special treatment. But when you compare it to the inadequate treatment millions of Americans receive from a system that is supposed to ensure equal protection for everyone it touches, well, it sure as hell starts to look like he did. Now, every day, countless defendants in courtrooms across this country where there are no cameras present are not receiving the just consideration set forth by the American Bar Association. And that failure has not just compromised our ability to administer justice even-handedly, it has sent people to prison undeservedly. According to a study by the National Registry of Exonerations, 54% of people who are wrongfully convicted were the victims of what is termed official misconduct. That's misconduct by the police, the prosecution, or some aspect of the criminal process. On death row alone, 69% of the 186 people exonerated since 1976 were victims of this official misconduct. Translation: people entrusted to enforce and uphold the law violated the legal rights of the defendant, and as a result, people lost decades of their lives to jail cells they should have never entered in the first place. Mostly because they couldn't afford a proper defense, and because too many judges couldn't be bothered to ensure the system worked on their behalf. And so that is what should infuriate Americans. Not the plight of Kyle Rittenhouse, not the actions of this judge. Now, they should be infuriated because millions of people are being devalued in our courts because they are poor, because they lack influence, because their life narrative does not comport with the media's agenda. Now, Michael Giles was an active member of the U.S. Air Force in the spring of 2010. He was 26 years old, and he had already finished 2 tours of duty in the Middle East. He went to a party. There was a melee. He was separated from his friends, and in the struggle, he shot one man in the leg. Now, in a just world, Michael would be a free man. Instead, he's been sitting in a Florida prison, serving a 25-year sentence for the high crime and misdemeanor of attempting to do what Kyle Rittenhouse did: defend himself. So we should not be attempting to build a world that does less for Kyle Rittenhouse. We should be demanding a world that does more for every single Michael Giles. Now, judges, they are the vanguard for building that world. They're the last line of defense against a system that chews up lives when allowed to proceed unmonitored. And so if equality is our goal, we need to stop acting as if Kyle Rittenhouse received extra protections he didn't deserve, and start talking about a better way to guarantee the protections every American is entitled to in cases where the glare of the national media is nowhere to be found. Because justice that isn't blind can't be trusted, and our system of justice is on the brink of complete and utter collapse.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.